She called me from the hospital parking lot. Not from inside. The parking lot. That was the detail that stuck with me, even weeks later. My daughter-in-law had just watched my son get wheeled into the emergency room, and instead of following him through those doors, she stood outside in the cold and called her mother. I didn't know that then. I only found out later, when the pieces started falling into place. What I knew that night was the phone ringing at 11:42 p.m. What I knew was her voice, flat and strange, saying, "There's been an accident, you should come. Not come quickly, not hurry, just, you should come." Like she was reading from a card. My son's name was Randolph. Everyone called him Rand. He was 38 years old, coached Little League on Saturday mornings, made the best smoked brisket in Forsyth County. He had his mother's laugh and my stubbornness, and he was the kind of man who called me every Sunday without fail just to check in, not for any reason, just because. He died 2 days later without regaining consciousness. A single-car accident on Timber Mill Road, about 4 miles from their house. The police report said he failed to navigate a curve. The road was dry, it wasn't raining. There were no skid marks, no skid marks. I remember reading that and thinking, Rand drove that road 5 days a week for 6 years. He knew every bend in it. But I was 63 years old and I had just buried my son, and grief has a way of making you accept things you shouldn't accept. So I folded the report back up, and I put it in a drawer, and I tried to figure out how to keep breathing. She, his wife, Ingrid, she moved through the funeral like she was somewhere else entirely. Not crying, not crying, just absent. People kept going to her, and she kept nodding and squeezing their hands and saying thank you. And I stood across the room watching her and feeling something I couldn't name yet. My daughter flew in from Denver. She pulled me aside on the second day and said, "Dad, something is off." I told her she was just grieving. She looked at me the way Rand used to look at me when I was wrong about something and didn't know it yet. 3 weeks after the funeral, my son's supervisor called me. His name was Walt, no, not Walt, Drummond, Ed Drummond. He'd known Rand for 9 years, hired him straight out of his master's program, called him the sharpest project engineer he'd ever worked with. When he called, I expected condolences. We'd already spoken once briefly at the service, but Ed didn't call to offer condolences. He said, "I need you to come to the office, not to talk on the phone, in person." He paused, "And please don't mention to Ingrid that we spoke." I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I drove 40 minutes to the industrial park off Route 9, where Rand's firm was headquartered. Ed met me at the lobby and walked me back through the building without stopping to talk to anyone. We went into a conference room. He closed the door, closed the blinds, and set a manila folder on the table between us. I looked at it. I looked at him. He said Rand came to me 6 weeks before the accident. He was scared. He didn't say that in so many words, you know how men are, but he was scared. He told me Ingrid had been pressuring him to change his life insurance beneficiary. He said there'd been arguments, that things at home had gotten bad in ways he didn't want to talk about. I couldn't speak. He also told me, Ed continued, that he'd been having headaches, persistent ones. Started around the same time as the arguments. He opened the folder. Inside were 2 sheets of paper. Printed emails. He sent me these. Said he was keeping a record just in case. His words, just in case. He slid them toward me. I didn't know what to do with them. I told him to talk to someone, to maybe call a lawyer. Ed's jaw tightened. He said he thought he was overreacting. The emails were dated 6 weeks before his death, 5 weeks before they were short. Rand wrote the way he talked, direct and without fuss, but they described things that made the room feel very cold. Ingrid going through his files. Ingrid asked about the policy payout. Ingrid once, standing in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, and when he came downstairs, she looked at him and didn't say a word and went back to bed. I don't know what I'm worried about exactly, he wrote in the second one. I just feel like I should tell somebody. I sat there for a long time. Then I asked Ed about the headaches. He said Rand had mentioned them 3 or 4 times, said they came on suddenly, mostly in the evenings, that he'd assumed it was stress, that Rand had assumed it was stress, that neither of them had thought much more about it than that. I drove home. I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes before I could go inside. Here is what I want to say to anyone listening to this. I am not a suspicious man. I spent 31 years as a high school history teacher. I coached track. I volunteered at my church. I am not someone who looks for the worst in people. But I had those emails. I had no skid marks. I had a daughter-in-law who stood in a hospital parking lot instead of walking through the door, and I had a son who had written down "I feel like I should tell somebody," and then told nobody but his boss, who had failed him. That question sat in me like a stone. I started quietly. I didn't hire anyone. I didn't call the police, not yet. I just started making calls and asking questions the way a 63-year-old retired teacher asks questions, politely, patiently, without tipping my hand. I called the mechanic who serviced Rand's truck. His name was Burrell. Ran a shop on Caldecott Street that Rand had used for years. I told him I was Rand's father, that I was trying to get closure, and could he pull the last service record. He found it in about 2 minutes. Rand had brought the truck in 11 days before the accident. Routine service. Oil change, tire rotation, brakes checked, and here Burrell paused. Brakes checked and noted as good, no issues. I asked him what that meant exactly. He said it meant the brake system was functioning normally. Pads were fine, fluid was fine, nothing that would cause a failure 11 days later. I thanked him. I hung up. I sat with that. No skid marks on a road he knew cold. Brakes certified fine 11 days prior. Persistent headaches that started when things at home got bad. A wife who pressured him about a life insurance policy. I called my daughter. She didn't say "I told you." She just listened, and when I finished she said, "Dad, you have to go to the police." I told her I didn't have enough. She said, "Then get enough." I want to be honest about the next part because I think people gloss over it in stories like this. The part where you're alone in the middle of the night and you're not sure if you're grieving wrong or thinking right. I second-guessed myself constantly. I am his father. Of course I didn't want his death to be an accident. Of course some part of me wanted it to mean something, wanted there to be a reason, wanted someone to blame. I knew that about myself. I held it up against everything I was finding and I asked myself, hard, am I seeing this because it's there or because I need it to be there? The headaches kept pulling me back. That detail felt medical. That detail felt like something that could be verified. I requested a copy of Rand's full medical records. He had listed me as an alternate contact years ago after his mother passed, and I hadn't had reason to use it until now. His primary care doctor had seen him twice in the 8 months before his death. The first visit was unremarkable. The second was 10 weeks before the accident. Rand had complained of recurring headaches, onset within the past 2 months, mostly evenings. The doctor had noted possible tension headaches, recommended he track them, suggested he consider his stress levels. 2 months. The headache started 2 months before his death. That matched what he'd told Ed. I thought about what can cause recurring evening headaches that start suddenly in an otherwise healthy 38-year-old man. I am not a doctor. I spent a lot of hours that week on medical websites I probably shouldn't have been on. But one thing kept coming up. One thing that was odorless, colorless, undetectable without a test, that caused exactly this. Headaches, especially in the evenings, especially at home. Carbon monoxide. I drove to their house. Ingrid had been staying there. It was the marital home. She had every right to be there. I didn't go inside. I drove past it slowly on a Tuesday morning, and I looked at the house, and I thought about my son coming home every evening and sitting in that kitchen and getting headaches and not knowing why. I called an HVAC inspector I knew from church, a man named Osric, known him for 15 years. I told him there might be a CO issue at a property and asked him if he could do an inspection. I said I was concerned about the current occupant's safety. I didn't tell him anything else. He went the following Thursday. Ingrid let him in. She didn't know who had sent him. He called me that evening. The furnace flue had been partially blocked. Not failed, blocked. There was a cap, he said. The kind of cap you use to seal off a vent that had been fitted over part of the exhaust outlet. It wasn't enough to cause acute poisoning. It was enough to cause a slow, steady leak into the living areas of the house. Enough to explain evening headaches in someone spending time in those rooms. Enough to cause, over weeks and months, the kind of impairment you might not notice until it mattered. He said it looked deliberate. He said he'd never seen anything quite like it. I sat down on my kitchen floor. I just sat down. I called the police the next morning. Not the local precinct, the county sheriff's office. I asked to speak to someone in the criminal investigations unit. I brought the emails Ed had given me. I brought the medical records. I brought the service record from Burrell's shop. I brought Osric's written inspection report, which he had prepared when I explained why I'd really asked him to go. The detective I met with was a woman named, and I want to be careful here, I'll call her the detective. She was younger than I expected. She listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, she looked at the documents for a long time, and then she looked at me and said, "Why did it take you 3 months to come to us?" I said, "Because I needed to be sure, because I'm his father and I knew that would be the first thing you'd say about anything I told you." She held my gaze for a moment. Then she said, "Leave these with me." The next 6 months were the hardest of my life, and that is saying something. I want you to understand. There is a specific kind of waiting that happens when you know something, and you cannot make anyone else move as fast as the knowledge burns in you. I called the detective's office more times than I should have. I drove past the house more times than was wise. I sat in Sunday services and watched the back of Ingrid's head. She still attended, third pew from the right, every week, and I felt something I am not proud of feeling in a church. What I held on to was Rand's voice. Not a memory of it exactly, more like a sense of it, the cadence of it. Just in case, he had written. He had known, on some level. He had tried to leave a trail. He had trusted someone, his boss, not his wife, not me, but someone with the beginning of the truth. I thought about that a lot. Why not me? I think I know why. I think he didn't want to scare me. I think he was 38 years old, and still at some level protecting his father. And that is the part that I will carry for the rest of my life. The arrest came on a Thursday in March. I found out from my daughter, who saw it on the local news before I did. She called me crying. I sat at my kitchen table and I did not cry. I had been so tensed against this moment for so long that when it finally came I just felt still, like water after the stone has gone in and the ripples have finally reached the edge. The investigation had found more than I'd known to look for. Financial records, search history on devices, a conversation with someone. I won't say more than that had been recorded. The case was stronger than I'd built it. They had built something I couldn't have built. That was some comfort. The trial took 9 days. I attended every one of them. I sat in the second row on the right side, and I watched and I listened and I kept my face still. My daughter sat beside me every day. We didn't talk much during the recesses. We'd just get coffee and stand outside and watch the street and then go back in. The verdict was returned on a Wednesday afternoon. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing happened 6 weeks later. I was allowed to read a statement. I had written it and rewritten it more times than I could count. And in the end I said something simple. That my son had tried to tell someone he was afraid. And that it had not been enough. And that I hoped, not for her, but for every person who would hear about this case, that the next person who says I'm scared, and I don't know why, would be believed before it was too late. The judge sentenced her to 40 years. I drove home alone. It was a Tuesday in September, and the light was doing that thing it does in early fall, going gold through the tree line off the highway, and I thought about Rand coaching Little League in light like that. I thought about his brisket. I thought about the Sunday phone calls, every one of them, faithful as a heartbeat. I don't feel like I won anything. I want to be clear about that. There is no version of this that ends with winning, but there is a version that ends with the truth, with his name attached to the truth, with what was done to him said out loud in a room full of people under oath. That's what I went looking for. That's what I found. I just wanted you to know.